Ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, the Fuzz is here. Today I'm going to talk about some of the cards that just don't see any play. These poor guys, most of the time, just sit in the collection and they don't get added to any decks and they don't really get to show off how great they are. Okay, well, most of them aren't really very good. That's the main reason why they aren't played. Now for this list, I avoided the Shamans and Totems because, well, all of them can be summarized with Shamans and Totems aren't good enough. Other than that, it's just all cards that are either just too weak or don't have a deck that could fit into. So let's kick it off. We got Militia, 1 mana, 1/1 with 1 speed. Oh my goodness. If you control another Militia, it costs 0. So what's the dream with this card? You play this one, you have 3 more in your hand, and you play them all for 0. Yeah, I guess that would be pretty good. But the thing is, these guys are just too easy to kill with anything. And it's a waste of a card to even include it, considering that your hero power summons them without spending any cards at all. So yeah, that's just why. It's just not enough of an effect for a card to be included in a deck. Heavy Infantry. This guy's a little bit better. He occasionally sees some play as kind of like a 2-drop. But the thing is, while he has great stats, 2/3 on 2-drop is pretty good. 1 speed means that he only really gets to kill zombie legionnaires, and it seems like that's what he was designed to do. But if you're up against Rage, for instance, they'll mostly just ignore it. Eventually they might fireball it. If you're up against Nature, they'll just trade with it favorably, using their Elf Scout or something. So this poor guy it's a little bit too slow. And the card's not awful. If you were going all soldier, if soldiers got some more support, this guy isn't too bad. The dream with him is to follow him up with a Cavalry Field Captain. Then he's a 3/4 with 2 speed. And he can basically kill anything. And that's very, very nice. Now I was thinking, could this card be buffed? Well, the thing is, not really, because if you gave him 2 speed, for instance, he'd be ridiculously good. He'd be just such a showstopper against aggro. It'd be ridiculous. And our order already has the Relic Guard with 3 health and 3 speed. They already have the other 2-drop that gives them life, and then more stuff that has 3 health. So this guy, it would just be the bane of goblins. But hey, maybe that's not such a bad thing. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. I think if you gave this card 2 speed, it would be insane. Griffin Rider, our good old Griffin Rider. This card used to be a 3/2 with 2 speed. And let me tell you, it sucked. It was supposed to be the goblin's worst nightmare. Well, it traded with 1 goblin. That's not very good. 3/2 is a worse stat line than 2/3 in this game because 2/2s are much more common than 3/3s. And so 2/3 can kill 2/2s, but a 3/2 will rarely trade with a 3/3. So it's just not very good. This version, a lot better. The 1 extra speed and the better stat line means he's somewhat competent at what he does. He just doesn't see play because he's a little bit too expensive, and if you're going into that much mana, you could play the Protector of the Innocent. For 1 more aspect, you get a 4/4 with 4 speed when defending. But I'm not sure if you could even buff this card. I think it'd be cool if he had 4 speed. That would be really neat. Then he would be a real hunter, for sure. Would that be OP? I don't think so. I don't think so. But at least it fills a role, because there isn't really any other card that is 3 speed and flying. Well, I mean, outside of Guardian of the Faithful, of course. But 4 mana, that's just a little bit too expensive. Night Escort. Now, this guy doesn't even look that bad, right? Well, maybe. It's got decent stats. 2/4 is pretty solid, and it has the equivalent of Vigilance, basically. So it can attack and is able to defend. So it looks like a good answer to aggro. So why isn't it played? Well, it's because, much like the Griffin Rider, for 1 more aspect, you could play the Guardian of the Faithful, which is an order of magnitude more powerful than this card. So it's just not worth the space, which is a shame. It is a knight also, but the knights don't have any synergy really, so there is not any reason to play it. If the knights ever do get some support, this card might have a look. Until then, just rest in our collection, friend. Next up, Jin Battlemaster. This card is very interesting. It's basically a 4/4 in creature combat, which for 3 mana and 1 aspect, that seems pretty good, and it is pretty good. The thing about him is, since he's a 2/2, he is just very easily removed, and sometimes removed by 1 cost cards like Noxious Fumes, and that sucks. And the thing about blue is that blue generally acts as support for other colors, and as support, they provide mostly card draw. That's why Library Guard is played, and also Disquisitive Spirit, or even just a hero power, or occasionally things like Flash Freeze, or maybe if you're using those, the Charged Ori Foundry Engineer combo. But this guy, unfortunately, isn't any of those cards, so he doesn't get played. Now, the card has some promise. If you could buff him somehow, if you could give him a Might counter, then he's a 3/3. Then suddenly he's very difficult to kill. You basically need like hard removal, or Fireball, I guess. Until then, the Jin Battlemaster waits for his turn. He bides his time, and then one day he will strike and take meta by himself. I don't know, maybe. Might be cool. Frost Elemental. Probably your first experience with this card is with the Wisdom starter deck, because this card is in there, and it functions reasonably well there because of the synergy of Flash Freeze. But much like the Battlemaster, it doesn't really fit what blue generally does. And the card itself isn't really even that bad. It's just that it occupies a bad slot, the 3-drop slot, and Wisdom already has a lot of 3-drops, and the ones you're going to play are usually going to be either Foundry Engineers or the Force Mage Protector. You don't really have room for this guy. But maybe if this was made a 2-drop, this was suggested, I believe, by Jotto, to make this a 2-drop, and if you did, would you have to reduce his stats? Would a 1/3 for 2 be too strong? Possibly with the freeze effect. It'd be a nice anti-goblin creature. I think it'd be quite strong, quite a solid 2-drop in that case. Maybe Wisdom needs a solid 2-drop, because right now, what do you have? A Golem and Disquisitive Spirit, right? Those are not exactly solid cards. So a solid Frost Elemental that freezes something, so it's an early drop that maintains usability in the late game? Yeah, sign me up. Until then, we will wait for you, Frost Elemental. We have not forgotten you. I don't know. Freezing creatures should be a thing more often. Spectral, alright. Also part of the starting Wisdom deck. And at a first glance, it looks really powerful, right? Because that deck also has Force Wielder. So you drop this guy on the board. He's a 2/3. And then, you power him up. Then he becomes a 4/3, 5/3, 6/3. Oh my god, it's so powerful. Well, the thing is, it's just very slow. And it's very expensive. Much like the Griffin Rider. But even more so because you need 2 aspects and 4 mana. And this dies to Fireball and Assassinate. Or like a Noxious and something else. Noxious and Plague Vermin. And it's just a really, really slow play. And again, this would require you basically to be running mostly Wisdom. You basically be trying to run the energy theme. But that isn't a thing yet. And even if it was, would you play this? I mean, why not play Dust Titan instead, right? Why not just rely on Foundry Engineers, who can abuse the extra energy a lot better, because this is still just one creature, and if you put a lot of energy into it, it could die really easily. But I can understand the design, and it's pretty cool. It could be a really strong finisher, something you could just throw one off, throw it on the field, and your opponent has to deal with it in the late game, but not really something you want to play on your turn 5, because it's just not strong enough. Moving on, the Electric Aurite, one of the saddest cards in the game. So it's a 2-drop for nature, which means it's competing with the Elf Warrior. So this bad boy is a 1/1 with 2 speed, and he starts with 1 energy. That's pretty cool. How does he use this energy? Well, he can give himself 2 attack in 1 combat, so he becomes a 3/1. Whoa. Now, let's think about this. What if this card was a 3/1 always? It didn't need energy, it was just a 3/1 as a 2-drop with 2 speed. Would that be good? Well, let's see. Elf Warrior is a 2/2 with 3 speed. That's arguably a little bit better. The Goblin Warrior is a 2/1 with 2 speed for 1 mana. So that's a little bit better. A Spoiled Aristocrat is a 3/1 for 1 mana. Okay, it has a small negative effect, but that's easily dealt with. So even if this was 3-1 at all times, I don't think it would see play. And the fact that it only becomes 3-1 once means this card is just quite awful. Now, I like the idea of cards like this that have energy that can do something with it, but this is not the way to go. I thought of a way of buffing this card is instead of gain 2 attack, it would be deal 1 damage to something. So it comes in, it can immediately deal damage to something, maybe kill a goblin, but then it's just a 1-1. But it's actually a nice answer to aggro, and it has some usability if it is able to do that 1 damage. And if you can give it more energy, it could become quite a good card. But as it is, unfortunately, this card just doesn't cut it. It's very, very bad. And nature has plenty of good cards to choose from. Up in Sky Rider, this is in the starting nature deck. And it looks like a good elf to play, except that it's not. Well, the simple comparison is the elf warrior is this, minus flying, but for 1 less mana. Is flying worth 1 more mana? It might be worth it on a bigger creature, but the elf warrior doesn't really need to be flying because it has 3 speed, it can outrun most enemies, and it isn't worth spending 3 mana to play this when you could play, let's say, another elf warrior and then give it swift. So it's not a terrible card, but it's just not worth the flying isn't worth the 1 extra mana on this bad boy. Primordial Treant. This is a very interesting card that actually was buffed, believe it or not. So you play him at the end of your turn, put any number of elves underneath it, and he gets twice that many might emblems. Well, he used to only get, that many might emblems instead of twice. So he gets twice as many, so he should be really powerful, right? Well, he's not. Because here's the thing. Imagine you've got 3 little elves on the board. You play this bad boy, he absorbs them, you've got a 9/9. Okay, that's no joke, right? Except that here's the problem. He has 1 speed. So your opponent can just chump block him for days. And so by removing those 3 elves, how much firepower have you removed from your board to power up this guy? Quite a lot, right? So because he's so easily stopped, that's the problem. Now, he isn't necessarily vulnerable to Karthus, because, well, the elves just go right back on the board, so that's not an issue. The one issue, though, is I don't actually know if this would work. I haven't really had a chance to test it. I don't know. You would have to test it with a friend, basically. Because right now, if you have a card like Mescation Phoenix, and it gets mind-controlled, and then it dies on your opponent's side of the board, your opponent is the one who gets the second form of the Phoenix. So presumably that's how it'll work with this guy. If your opponent steals the Treant and sacrifices it, he will get the elves because it died and went to his graveyard. I'm not sure if that's how it'll work, but it might. But in any case, until that rule is dealt with, this card is not even a consideration. But even if that wasn't the case, this card needs to be unstoppable, I think. If it was unstoppable, it would be quite interesting, because if you play it, get this huge creature with unstoppable, well, then it is a threat. Your opponent can't just chump block it. And when your opponent does kill it, no problem, the elves all go right back. So that'd be a really cool card. If it is unstoppable, I think I would consider playing it. But because it doesn't, you don't benefit from putting it on the board, really, and putting elves underneath it. Oh well. Shame. Cool card. Sun Chaser, alright. That's another cool card that just doesn't quite work out. The 3 mana 3 aspect, the problem is, at this level, it's competing with things like Guardian of the Faithful, Mescation Phoenix, Drayla, and there's even cards that are 3 aspect, 2 mana, that are basically better than this guy. Ramgek, Fae of Charm, Ancient Treant, Necromantic Cult. This card just doesn't quite work out. I mean, 4/4, it's got a pretty big body, that's for sure. The effect is just not terribly useful, though, because he cannot use it to avoid getting attacked. But even if he could, would it really be that good? I don't know. The only real saving grace of him is that he only costs 1 green, so you could splash him, but you don't really have any reason to splash him. I think if he had a better use for his energy, maybe give, some other creature 2 speed instead of just himself, maybe it'd be cool. That would be interesting if you could speed up something else, but maybe give him 2 energy, and then he spends 1 energy to give something some speed. That would give you some tactical control over the battlefield. That would be interesting. But as it is, it's just It's not a horrible card, it's just worse than cards of this level. So this lion creature with horns, whatever it is, it looks really cool, but unfortunately he doesn't get to show his skills except in the collection. What a shame. Orc Javelin Years. Ooh, fancy card. I used to run this in my Rage deck, but then I realized it's just not that good. Well, it isn't horrible. Okay, so for this cost, other comparable creatures are Hunting Gigantodon and Zombie Giant. This guy is smaller than both of those guys, but it's got ranged, which is an advantage because it means that you can't mob him as easily. So why doesn't see any play? Well, it's because Rage mostly goes for many but cheap creatures like Gibbo and Roni, which puts 4 damage on the board with higher speed than this guy. Oh yeah, he has 1 speed. That's the issue, really. But other than that, it's just Rage has better options. For 1 more mana, you could play Phoenix, which is much better, or just Ram Gat even for a similar cost. This guy just isn't quite good enough. I don't know. I don't think you can really improve him much though. It's just the way it's designed. If you give him 2 speed, that would be interesting, but that would be a little bit too good then. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe you guys can come up with an idea to make this guy a little bit more appealing. Powerseeker. Oh my goodness. Well, this card looks really cool, but it isn't. So yeah, you get to spend mana to power him up. So it seems like this is exactly how you want to use all those weird cards that give you extra mana, right? Power this guy up, hit for so much damage. The problem is that you only get to power him up on your own turn or during your opponent's combat. So when it's your opponent's turn and it's not combat, well, he's just gonna kill it with like anything. And also, consider that you do have a lot of mana. Let's say you have 5 mana, and if you power him up to 5-6 and you kill something, okay, that's great, but then you've spent your entire turn. So you haven't really done all that much. And even if you get to like ridiculous mana levels, when you've got like 15 mana and you can recharge, okay, then in that case he could be really dangerous. But again, just all it takes is just one single removal of any kind, or even just Vampiric Touch takes care of this. So it's just way too easy to kill. If this was a 0-2, it would still be kind of awful, but a little less so. Or make it a 0-3, but only gain attack. So I don't know. That'd be kind of like the spectral alright thing, but it'd be easier to use because you would need energy. You just use mana. Maybe that would be cool. Bump up his cost a little bit, but make him a 0-3, 0-4 even. That gains attack. A 0-4 might be a little bit OP because he's got 3 speed. I don't know, something like that. Gross Experiment. Whoa, look at all those needles on his back. So it's a 1-2 with 2 speed. That's not too good. But what about the effect? Look at the top 4 cards. Attach any implant to him. That seems pretty strong, right? Well, that will be pretty strong, except most implants aren't any good. The only one that is, really, is Overcharger, which gives plus 3/3. And if you get this guy, you play him, and you hit an Overcharger, that's pretty good. Because then he becomes a 3/4 on the next turn with Unstoppable. That's quite threatening. Unfortunately, most of the time you won't hit it. And even if you run all the implants, you run all 12 of them. We're not counting Helm of Dominion because you don't really want to use that for this guy. You run all 12. You have approximately 60% chance to hit one of them. That seems pretty good, right? Well, the thing is that if you hit Overcharger, that's pretty good. If you hit the middle one, the Grappling Hook, which gives plus 2/2, that means he becomes a 3/4, but then at the start of the next turn, he's a 2/3. That's alright, I guess, but it's not groundbreaking. And then, what? Then if you hit the 1/1, well, then he doesn't even get a power boost because he just loses it. This is the kind of card that can sometimes be really broken because if you play it, you hit an Overcharger, and the next turn you hit another Overcharger, then it's like a 6/7 with Unstoppable, and you know your opponent can't deal with it. He just loses immediately. But most of the time, it's not gonna happen, and it's just gonna die. Now, what you have to consider with this card is, even though it's bad now, it could become really good if we get more implants. If we get more implants that are good, or at least decent, this card could be pretty good. But as it is, we just don't have enough. Until then, stay tuned, Gross Experiment. You might yet see light of day. Silverblade Warrior, one of the most boring cards in the game. 2/3 with 2 speed with, for 3 mana as a 3-drop. Well, the Elite Vanguard is a 3-drop. That's a 3/3, so it's strictly better. The Rakshi Tribe Shaman guy is this stat line, but has an effect, so it's better than this. Bloodwitch Harpy, as this stat line, has one more aspect, but it's flying and an awesome effect. So basically what I'm saying is this card just doesn't do anything. It is one of the very few cards that has no text at all, kind of similar to Heavy Infantry, but Heavy Infantry could at least say, well, I have the best stat line for the cost. This card does not have the best stat line for the cost, and without any other effect, it's just kind of there to fill space. It's not even good as an elf. You can pick better elves than this guy. Poor Silverblade Warrior. Next up, Bloodborn Prince. Here's another card that used to cost 4 mana. Well, now it costs 3. And it doesn't see any play. But that's actually not because the card sucks. The card doesn't suck. It's just that anyone who's played with Dominion, well, you're usually using the Karthus, Cataclysm overpowered garbage. Or you're playing with Implants. And this guy, it's not a terrible card. I mean, 1/3 is kind of crappy stat line, but if you can sack even one creature and becomes a 2/4 with Lifebound, that's suddenly pretty decent. But you have to get a creature to sack, so you'd have to try to play a deck that maybe combines with the either Restless Tombs or Spawning Militias or something to try to feed this guy to make him really strong. It could be an idea for a new OP episode. I'll actually think about it. And who knows, maybe the card won't be terrible. You probably would run it alongside things like Devious Plot, maybe the Sell into Slavery, and then use Order to try to spawn as many creatures as possible for this guy to eat. I mean, if he eats 3 things, he's a 4/6. That's not easy to kill. I mean, Dominion can kill it, but that's because Dominion is overpowered. And Nature can bounce it back to hand, and that'll be sad, but other than that, man, 4/6 with Lifebound? Come get some. This card could be good. It's just, you have to kind of work with it, and the way Dominion is played, well, it doesn't work with it. That's why it's not played. Gnome Surgeon. This is a very interesting card. It's a support. For 2 mana, and exhaust him, search your deck for an implant, and attach it to a creature you control. Right, that looks really good, right? Just search for an Overcharger and put it onto something? So why isn't this played? Well, it turns out that the only implant that's worth a damn, really, is the Metabolic Overcharger. And here's a fun fact. There's another card that can get the Metabolic Overcharger out of your deck. It's called Contraptionist. That's right. Contraptionist gets the Overcharger out, and it does so immediately. As in, this guy, you play him, and then you have to spend 2 more mana before you can get anything going. And he could just be killed, but the Contraptionist immediately puts it on the board. So, it's just more consistent. But this card, very much like the Gross Experiment, could become really good if, we get some more implants that work. By the way, this says attach it to your creature. So, no, you don't get to search for Helm of Dominion and attach to an enemy creature. That would be ridiculously stupid. Blood-Seeking Mutant. This card sees some play in Trials, where it can often win like a grind game. But the card is just kind of badly designed. And here's why. So first of all, it's very expensive for a very small body. So most of the time, you're going to put it on your support line. Otherwise, it's just way too easy to kill. It dies to Fireball, Assassinate, and mostly any other creature that attacks it. The effect, though, looks like it's really fun, right? Put a weakness counter on an enemy creature. Put a might counter on this guy. Hey, that's really good. What's wrong with that? Well, here's the problem. If you don't have a valid target, oh yeah, by the way, he cannot put it on another vampire or on himself. So, only on other things. So, if your opponent doesn't have any creatures, you have to target your own stuff, because this is not optional. Furthermore, if there isn't a target, he goes back to your hand. So he basically counters himself. Let's say if your opponent plays a 2/1, you play this guy. Your opponent, maybe passes turn, and then he's going to pass turn again, and then this guy just goes back to your hand. That's a real shame, because this card could be really solid. as just a way to, you know, accumulate value and become a real threat. But because he returns himself to hand, I don't know, it's kind of bad. He's already kind of bad because he's expensive for the small body. But even if he does work out, your opponent will just sit, and then he'll just kill himself, or you'll be forced to start killing your own creatures. So I would just say get rid of the whole return him to hand if you can do the effect. Just give him the effect. At the start of your turn, you can put a counter on another creature, and then put a weakness counter on another creature, and a might counter on himself, if you want to. And if you can't, no problem. In that case, the card might actually be pretty interesting. But as it is, it's just not. And even in trials, I've had games where I've run up against like my opponent having 2 of these dudes on the board. He puts them on the support line, but then I still end up winning because he spends his entire turn doing nothing. And then only so that the next turn he can inflict the weakness counter on one of my things. Yeah, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's a shame because it's a really cool card otherwise. Knightbringer. This little dude is part of my Demonologist deck. And that's probably the only deck he's part of, really. I suppose you could use him if you were trying to mill, but milling isn't a thing. That's why, and it's a 1/1, so it's not going to trade with anything. Insatiable Ghoul. This is a very curious one. This card is actually not even bad. 3/3 on a 3-drop. That looks pretty solid, and in fact it is, but it has a bad effect, where at the start of your turn, put a creature card from your graveyard on the bottom of your deck. Otherwise, decay 3 cards and exhaust him. So the problem with this is that if you play him on 3, and you don't have a creature in your graveyard, then he basically just gets exhausted the next turn, and he ends up being a nothing play. And the card isn't so strong as to justify a negative effect. Yeah, it's like the Elite Vanguard, so it's decent, it's solid, but not so good that you have to have a negative effect on him. So that's my problem with it. The fact that he's just not consistent, not reliable. Because if you play him against aggro and he gets exhausted, well, then that just sucks. He just gets ignored and your opponent swings face. Oh well. It's a shame though. I think this card would be pretty good otherwise if you just remove the effect or you replace it with something else. Maybe something that messes with your graveyard. Even just at the end of your turn, decay 2 cards or something, right? I don't know. Would that be too good? I don't know, but as it is, it's just a little bit too inconvenient to use. And Corruption already has some other good 3-drops, like Flesh Sculptor, like Mesmerizing Spirit, that don't have any drawbacks and usually have good effects. So this guy, unfortunately, just isn't quite up there. Moving on, the Undead Necromancer. Whoa, all your zombies are deadly. Man, that's so powerful. Except it isn't, because the only time this really makes a difference is if you already have a large army of zombies. In which case, them getting deadly means your opponent can't just trade them off efficiently. He has to lose creatures. But in that case, you're probably already winning. In all the games that I've won because I had too many zombies, in no way was my opponent able to deal with them. So even if they were deadly, it wouldn't have made a difference. So that's why this guy isn't played. Also, he has 1 speed himself. So, I mean, the only time he really annoy you is if you play against the AI. And the AI opens with Restless Tombs and follows up with this, then it's like, oh my god. But then you're losing the game because of Restless Tombs, not because of him, really. It's a shame, though. Zombies could use a little bit of love, and this guy just... he gives them the wrong kind of love. Speaking of love, Undead Hydraman. Man, what an awesome zombie, right? Well, this card actually used to cost 4 mana, and it was 3 aspects, but it was a 6/6. And it was made this, which is arguably a debuff. I'd say so. A little bit of a debuff. So it's unstoppable, which is really awesome. That's exactly what it should be. For a big, slow creature, it should be unstoppable. The thing is, 5 mana is a lot to pay for a creature that is, because it has 1 speed, it doesn't immediately impact the board. It's not going to be able to block anything. So it's really only strong if you're not behind on the board, in which case it represents a very large threat for your opponent. It's reasonable in trials for that reason, but, you know, the Corruption has better things they can play instead of this. So, it's a shame. But maybe one day, who knows, if zombies get some kind of support, that makes them faster, for instance. Hey, imagine giving this thing 2 speed. Oh my god. That would be terrifying. I don't know, I think 5 mana is a little too expensive. And then Dreadknight, the biggest and the baddest. Oh wait, that's not even a zombie. What? It's a knight. Well, not that it really matters. You're not going to play him with Namir. So anyways, this guy used to be 2 aspects and 4 mana. And man, was it a badass card. For a 5-drop with 6/6 stats that disables a defender, it was awesome. But now he got bumped up to 3 aspects, so he's kind of slow. And much like the Hydra, he's played and then, you know, nothing happens for a turn. Now, the fact that he can disable blockers does mean that he can actually become very dangerous. And because he's deadly, you can't mob this guy. You lose everything that tries to attack into it. But just the general nature of big creatures get killed by Karthus or Helm of Dominion means that this guy just doesn't get to see much play. That's a shame, because that thing's a really awesome card. And I would like Dreadknight to become a thing again. Who knows? Maybe I'll just play it. If Corruption gets some kind of an update, some support, some better cards, you could have played this card alongside things like Zierra, and you know it would work out reasonably well. But as it is, it's just too slow. It's too slow. Now the spells. So let's see what we got. Guard Duty. It spawns militias. So for 2 mana, you get 2 militias. Well, your hero power spawns 1 militia for free. Well, you know, for 2 mana, but without using a card. So why in the world would you use a card? Yeah, sorry. Militia's just not that good. Word of Knowledge. The only time I've ever seen this card played is in a version of a Reanimator deck. The idea being is you just cycle your deck as quickly as possible to fill up your graveyard so you can abuse Reanimate. And it worked reasonably well there. The problem with this card is that it doesn't generate any advantage, because you discard as many cards as you draw, and then you draw the 1 card to replace itself. So if you have 3 aspects, you will draw 3 cards, and then you discard 2, plus this. You broke even. You didn't actually increase your hand size, whereas all the other words, they draw you a card, and then do something else. So this just doesn't seem to work. It should at least provide some kind of card advantage. The more aspect wisdoms you have. Aspects of wisdom, I mean. Because think about it, why not just play the Ancient Wisdom card, which just draws you 2 cards? You know, you get card advantage. This doesn't give you card advantage. The only time it's good is if you are trying to cycle your deck, fill up your graveyard, but that's a very specific circumstance. And because of that, the card is just not very good. Astral Dive. Here's a card that should see play, because it's basically draw 1 for 1. It's a simple cycle, and it gives your stuff energy. Well, the thing is, energy isn't really a thing. Foundry Engineers are pretty good, but you only really need to play Charged Aurite to make it good, because the Engineers power themselves up, so you don't need Astral Dive. But if energy ever becomes a thing, Astral Dive is going to be played there, because it gives you a bunch of energy on the board, and it replaces itself, and it's all for 1 mana. So that could lead to some really cool combos. Actually, you don't have to use it with the Wisdom energy theme. You could use it with cards like Chalice of Youngs, for instance, and get 1 extra life. Yeah, that's that's a thing. That could be a thing. So Astral Dive is just waiting for a deck to put it into, but it'll probably happen eventually. Force Field. Well, it looks like a really strong card. You take 1 less damage from everything. All your creatures take 1 less damage from everything. That looks really strong. And it's not even that bad. It's kind of expensive. And the thing about spells in this game is that they often fall prey to unicorns and non-power engineers. And if you play this and it gets a unicorn, it's just a massive tempo loss at no cost to your opponent. And so it makes cards like this a bit of a liability. So the only spells or artifacts you play are ones that are really strong, like Restless Tombs and Lamp of Zephyr, that are real threats if they stay on the board. This isn't really a threat, it's just kind of a defensive spell. One that, you know, you can't actually sustain it if you use the Energy Burst Scale Shrine. And, you know, having your stuff always take 1 less damage, it's pretty nice. But it's too easy to destroy this card. And, you know, until, I don't know if there's ever anything going to be done about Unicorn and Non-Power Engineer, but as long as those cards are, you know, cards, any spell that is created by the developers is going to have to consider, okay, well, I could be instantly destroyed. Am I actually worth it? So that's the issue. What a shame. Call of Jalaya. Here's a card I thought was really strong, and yet I virtually never see it played. Search your deck for a nature creature card that costs 2 or less and put it into your hand. So what can it search? Well, it can search out Unicorn, it can search out Fae of Charm, and it can search out Ancient Treant. So basically your best cards. So why isn't it played? I actually don't know why it's not. My best guess is that you don't need to search for them. You'll just draw into them frequently enough. And those decks generally run to... They tend to run like 3 of all those cards. So they draw into them reasonably consistently. But you could probably replace one of each. Take out 1 Unicorn, 1 Treant, and 1 Fae, and just put on a couple of these. That way you can search for them and play them as you need them. You need a Unicorn? Search for a Unicorn. Need a Fae of Charm? Get a Fae of Charm. Need a Treant? Get a Treant. So I think it's just a matter of people doing that. But at the moment, no one is doing it because they don't seem to need to do it. And so they just don't. And also the fact that you are paying 1 mana, so it slows you down a little bit. But the versatility seems to be really good. Now actually the one time I've seen this card really used was when a guy was trying to make use of the Grand Reunion. Back then it didn't have the effect where it searched your deck for a creature. So he played like the most stalling control deck imaginable, and then ran several of these and used them to search out the Elf, Plant, Fae, and Spirit to get into his hand, and then play Grand Reunion on me. That was a very interesting deck actually, but I've never seen anybody do that since because it's just way too slow, and other control decks are just better. Like 1 turn heal even is just more consistent and faster than that deck. So yeah, cool card. I think it'll eventually see some play because it's not in any way bad. And especially if nature gets any more cards that are searchable, this card's just going to get better. Test of Time. Well, Unicorn exists. Yeah, that's all you need to say. Yeah, it's an instant, but when do you need to destroy a spell as soon as it's played? The only time really would be like a charging Lamp of Zephyr. That's about it. You need to avoid 4 damage, but those things are rare and only happen later on. So, nah, it's really not that big of a deal. I'd much rather play Unicorn. Wasps Warm. Now, here's a card I don't think I've ever seen anybody actually play against me. Ever. Every one of these other cards, at least I saw sometimes. You know, once or twice in a blue moon. In another dimension. But this card, no. So, what does it do? Move everything to the support line. Well, what use is that? The way this game works is that if you have a creature on the front and you put it on the support, you can move it back and forth any number of times until you decide to attack or something, or use an exhausting ability. So if you play Wasps Warm, everything goes to the support. You can then put your things back on the front line, and you could then attack. And all of your opponent's frontline blockers cannot defend. And then next turn, they would all have to go back to the front line, and any that aren't swift can't attack. So it seems to be very similar to the Advanced Darius ability, where it kind of disables your opponent's board. But it's a lot worse than that, because Darius' power not only does damage, so it might actually kill some things, but it affects flyers as well. And because it shocks them, not only can they not block, they also can't attack next turn, and they can't block the turn after that. So yeah, it's just worse than that. And nature generally doesn't really need help getting over stuff. All their stuff is fast already. In fact, their biggest threats are flyers. So this doesn't do anything with flyers. And so it just doesn't work for nature or really anything. It's kind of just a waste of a card. Welcome to possibly the worst card in the game, Vegetation Blockade. This card actually received a buff. That's right. This is the buffed version. Let that sink in for a moment. So, what does it do? Enemy creatures cost 2 more to play. Alright, that sounds cool. When an enemy hero plays a creature, sacrifice this card. Wait a minute. So, what does this card actually do? Well, what it does is that you pay 2 mana to force your opponent to spend 2 more mana, basically. So you kind of stall them a little bit. But that's all it does. So you're asking, how was this card buffed? Well, it used to cost 3 mana. So you would pay 3 mana to make your opponent spend 2 more mana. So it was the worst thing you could imagine. But even now, this card, you could say, well, isn't this kind of like Jorale's Silencer? True, but here's 2 main differences. Jorale's Silencer costs 4 mana and denies 6 mana. Second of all, the cards your opponent plays are actually lost. So your opponent not only loses 6 mana, he loses 6 mana worth of cards. So the Silencer not only slows down your opponent, but also accumulates value. This card doesn't accumulate any value. You play this, your opponent spends 2 mana, and then you lose this card. So what did you really accomplish? I mean, if you wanted to slow down your opponent, you use Jungle Death Trap, which has basically a similar application, except the Death Trap can also absorb bigger creatures, because any level 2, so it could take something like a Griffin Rider. So it's much better than this, and also the Death Trap, you could give it Swift and it could attack for damage. So basically what I'm saying is this card is unimaginably useless, and you should never even consider playing it. Boiling Blood. Attach to a creature and give it 2 attack. Hooray! Used to cost 1 mana, and it was alright. Now, 2 mana is just too much. You could just play another Goblin instead, or 2 Goblins, and you'd be a lot better off. The only real use of this card is on Fia. If you put her on Fia, she's a 3-1 with Swift and ranged. She actually becomes pretty strong, because you can't assassinate her anymore, and she can kill most anything she fights. But other than Fia, like it's very rarely worth putting an attack buff on anything, really. We don't have double strike in the game. And what are you gonna combine it with a lifebound creature? It's just not worth it. 2 mana for such a small effect, it's just not good enough. Sorry, Boiling Blood. Detonate. Well, you remember how Test of Time is a worse version of Unicorn? Well, this is a worse version of Test of Time. That's all that needs to be said. Ruination. Destroy 3 artifacts for both players. Well, they sacrifice them. So, this card basically exists as a super hard counter against artifact-based decks, like 1-turn heal, like anything that runs a lot of lamps. And in that case, I guess it does well enough. It's just that Rage is generally attacking quickly and aggressively, that they don't care about your artifacts. They'll either kill you before it ever becomes an issue, or they've already lost by then. The only Rage deck that might consider this is like a Control Rage deck, and they will just run this card as kind of like a tech against those decks. Throw in 1 or 2 and then just Divine Offering it away as soon as you realize there's no play for it. Quite an expensive card, but you know, destroying 3 artifacts on your opponent's side could be quite devastating. No, kind of, but it has a very limited application right now, so until we get more artifacts, it's just not gonna see any play. Word of Power! Give me more power! So this is one of the other words that kind of sucks. So what's the deal? Sacrifice a mana crystal. So presumably you would sacrifice the mana crystal that you spent to cast this, and then you gain 1 mana for each of your Dominion levels. Interesting. And then draw a card, of course. So let's see. If you have 1 level of Dominion and you play this, basically nothing happens except you cycle a card for 0, but you also lost a mana crystal. That's pretty awful. Let's not do that. If you have 2 Dominion levels, you'll basically gain 1 mana for the turn, and you'll cycle for 0, but you lost a mana crystal. Okay, I guess. It still doesn't sound very good. If you have 3 Dominion levels, then you gain 2 mana for the turn, and then you cycle. So the idea with this card is to try to push out like a bigger turn, like suddenly ramp to a bigger creature all of a sudden, right? I guess, but the thing is, there's better ways to ramp, i.e. New Horizons, and this card is just... I don't really even get it, because since you have to be running pure Dominion to use this, it just doesn't seem very good. You need to have at least 3 Dominion for it to even be any good. And even if you get the Dream, you get 3 Dominion aspects, you play this card, you get 2 more mana. I mean, okay, presumably, let's say if you are on 3 aspects and 2 mana, you play this and then you can play a Titan, right? Or maybe you can play Karthus if you were on 4. I guess, but it seems very convoluted to pull off, and you do lose a mana crystal, so you will be slowed down afterwards. This kind of reminds me of Innervate in Hearthstone, except it replaces itself but it destroys a crystal. So it just doesn't work. There isn't really any need to bump up your mana like this, early on at least, and later on you have so much mana that it won't even matter. I do not even know how to use this card. If you guys know of a way to make this card good in some combo, let me know. I would love to know that. I am at a loss for words as for what to do with this card. Dreadful Nightmares. This card actually sees a little bit of play. In a control versus control, you use this to just mill a bunch of cards for your opponent to try to win the control game. Yeah, that's about it. I think for this card to be any good, it would have to draw you a card as well, so that it replaces itself. Because this card doesn't actually do anything by itself. I mean, yeah, if you have a lot of mana, you can mill some, I guess. But what about any other time? I mean, you could set up your deck a little bit. Yeah, you could look at the top 3 cards, let's say. Pick the one you want to draw next. Send with the graveyard. Yeah, that looks decent, but you're spending a card and 3 mana to do that. It's very slow. It's way too slow. So yeah, this card needs to draw you a card. That way you're not actually actively losing value. But in that case, you would have to be required to spend at least 1 mana, so you don't get to just play it for 0 and draw a card and just cycle your deck. So yeah. Yeah, that's that. Hands from Beyond. Kind of in a similar bucket as the Force Field, where it's a really nice card to have on the field, but you know, it's susceptible to being destroyed by unicorns, non-power engineers, and even if it sticks around, it's not really that overwhelming. Although, if you've played against the AI and they've played 2 of these against you, and all your stuff is 1 speed, yeah, that can be pretty annoying sometimes. But only if they already have a big board of zombies. So it's supposed to help zombies, I guess, but it just isn't that good. It's a bit expensive for what it is. I think this card could almost just draw a card when you play it, because then it would actually be quite an attractive choice. You play it, you recover the card, and then you get some advantage on the board. I don't know. Maybe that'd be too OP. We don't want too many things to draw cards when they are played, in addition to an effect. We don't want everything to become a library guard. The card's not terrible, but it's just not enough of a spell, really, when you could play Restless Tombs and have much, gain more advantage over time than this card. Oh well. Midnight Feast. Oh man. Put up to 3 creatures from the enemy hero's graveyard on the bottom of his deck, and then you get a Might Emblem on that many allied zombies. Whoa! Power up your zombies. This card kind of sucks. It reminds me of Word of Vigor, which gives you a might counter for every nature aspect. Here's the difference between this and Word of Vigor. Word of Vigor costs 2 mana instead of 1. Word of Vigor is instant. Word of Vigor draws you a card when you play it. Word of Vigor does not require creatures in your opponent's graveyard. Word of Vigor can be used on any creature, not just elves, for instance. So what I'm saying is Word of Vigor is considerably better than this card in every way. Yeah, I guess this is supposed to help zombies, but it's just not good enough. It's too expensive, I think. For 3 mana, I mean, your opponent has to have 3 things in his graveyard. That's not going to happen for a while. And generally, if you're playing like really big zombie creatures, they don't need to be powered up because they're slow. So they'll either already be able to kill what they want to kill, or they'll just be ignored. So, nah, doesn't work. Doesn't work. Flash of Delirium. Well, milling isn't a thing yet, so this isn't a thing yet. But if you need to load up your graveyard, this is the card to go. But yeah, this card is waiting for some mill support, basically. Alright, winding down, we get the Power Spike armor. One of the bad implants. Why is it bad? Well, it gets +1/1, which is great. But at the start of your next turn, it loses that power up. So it was only like a temporary boost. The thing is, it then continues to lose power on subsequent turns. So basically what I'm saying is it sucks. Because of the way implants work, you needed to give way more than 1/1. That's why Overcharger is good, because it gives you +3, and then even the next turn it's still +2, so it's still good. But +1, yeah, you are unstoppable or unblockable, whatever, but it's not good enough. Grappling Hook. This one's a little bit better. You get +2/2. And the ability to pull something from the support line. That's actually pretty cool. And I might even run it if it wasn't level 2, because Contraptionist cannot fetch this. Metabolic Overcharger is the only one that Contraptionist can actually fetch, which is hilarious, because it's the best one. Oh man, poor Grappling Hook. That's a shame, because the idea of pulling creatures from the support line is actually really neat. But this card is just not that good. It's not that bad. It's kind of alright. I suppose if there were more good implants and you could run things like the Gross Experiment and the Surgeon, this card might see some play. But as it is, if you're using implants, you're using Overcharger and you're using Contraptionist. It's as simple as that. Dark Portal! Well, I already kind of covered this card in my Demonologist video. Basically, you need demons, and you need more than what we have. What we have is just not quite good enough. We definitely need a demon that would, let's say, prevent this from gaining energy, stop the drain, or prevent you from losing the life. I don't know, some kind of support to make this card really cool, to make demons really cool. Until then, Dark Portal is waiting for the time to rise, or something. And the last card, the Grand Institute, a skill shrine. So, basically, think of this as a regular shrine that gives you a wisdom, or it gives you mana. You can switch between the two, but you don't get to draw a card. It's kind of like ramp, but you're not actually ramping. It just gives you the option to trade 1 mana for aspect. I guess it's not horrible, but the thing is, New Horizons exists, and it's much better than this. And secondly, excuse me. Secondly, since you're spending mana, you're not really advancing yourself in any way. And if you have more Mage's Wisdoms, then it just gets further cloggy. I suppose you could run one of this as an extra ramp. Maybe. One of this would be alright. But I don't know if it's worth giving up the draw just to be able to get 1 extra level. I suppose it'd be alright. But again, New Horizons is the thing. I don't know, maybe Mage's Wisdom one day will be better. But that day is not today. That is all the cards. Man, I've rambled for a long time. But anyways, let me know, guys, if there's any other cards you think I should have included. Are there any cards that you play from this list that you think are good that I was unfair towards? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe. I think I'm gonna have to try out the Bloodborne Prince deck, because that's gonna be the new OP meta. I guarantee you. Totally not gonna happen, but I think it's just worth trying to see if we can make something out of this really cool creature. So stay tuned, and thank you for watching. I will see you guys next time.